Glad to see you again. Please leave a comment. Where are you watching this from?
I used to think twins shared everything. That was before my sister shared my face with the man I loved, and kept the rest for herself. I stood in the parking lot of the Hilton Garden Inn, watching the valets scurry between SUVs and sedans. The August heat pressed against my black silk dress like a warning. 10 years. 3,653 days since I'd last seen my own reflection in someone else's life. The invitation in my clutch said, Eleanor and James, 10th anniversary. It should have said Eleanor and Eleanor, because the woman inside wearing my name wasn't Eleanor. She was Claire, my twin. The one who'd looked in the mirror one morning and decided my future looked better on her. My phone buzzed. A text from my lawyer. Documents ready, are you? I didn't answer. I was too busy staring at the glass doors, watching my own ghost walk through them. The first time I met James Harrington, I was 24, and drowning in law school debt at a Brooklyn diner called Sal's. He wore a suit that cost more than my semester tuition and ordered coffee like he was negotiating a merger. Black. No sugar. Then he looked up, and his gray eyes stopped on me like I'd called his name. You're not from around here, he said. Born in Ohio. Does that count? It counts. He smiled, and something in my chest shifted, a tectonic plate I didn't know was there. I'm James. I buy failing businesses and fix them. Eleanor. I serve coffee and argue with professors. He came back the next morning, and the next. By Friday, he knew my order. Scrambled eggs, wheat toast, side of justice, and I knew he slept 4 hours a night and talked to his mother every Sunday. By March, I was wearing his grandmother's ring and planning a wedding in his family's vineyard in Napa. By June, I was planning to die. That's what Claire wanted the world to think anyway. The night before the wedding, she came to my apartment with 2 glasses of wine and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. We'd been estranged for 2 years. Some fight about money, about Mom's house, about who deserved what. But she showed up with tears and apologies, and I was stupid enough to believe her. I want to make things right, she said, sliding the glass across my kitchen table. For tomorrow. For your big day. The wine tasted metallic. I remember that. I remember her watching me drink it, her fingers drumming a rhythm I couldn't hear. Then the room tilted, and the floor rose to meet me, and Claire's face was the last thing I saw. My own face, smiling down at me like a funhouse mirror. I woke up in a storage unit outside Sacramento, bound with zip ties, my mouth taped, my head pounding like someone had split it with an axe. It was 3 days later. 3 days. My wedding day had come and gone. My phone was gone. My wallet was gone. My sister was gone. And James? James thought I was dead. The storage unit had a window too high to reach, a concrete floor, and a bucket in the corner. Claire had left me protein bars and water bottles, enough to survive, not enough to live. She'd thought of everything. My twin, the sister who knew my fears, my allergies, my social security number. The sister who'd practiced my signature since we were 12. I screamed until my throat bled. I kicked the door until my feet turned purple. On day 4, I started planning. The first thing I did was count my resources. 1 black dress, 1 pair of heels, a wallet with $300 Claire had missed in the lining, a phone she'd been too confident to destroy, dead, but intact. And a mind that had spent 3 years in law school learning how the system worked, how people worked, how the world punished the patient. I waited until night, used a loose nail to work the zip ties, crawled through a ventilation grate I'd spent 2 days loosening, walked 14 miles to a gas station in bloodied bare feet, bought a charger, and called the one person who'd believe me. Maya Chen, my roommate from law school. The woman who'd once helped me bury a dead hamster at 3 a.m. and never asked why. Eleanor? Her voice cracked like she'd seen a ghost. They said you drowned. They had a funeral. Claire identified the body. There was no body, I whispered, leaning against the gas station's flickering sign. There was only her, and him, and everything that should have been mine. Maya didn't ask questions. She drove 6 hours from San Francisco, brought me clothes and a burner phone and a lawyer's silence. In her car, shaking under a blanket that smelled like her dog, I made the first decision that would define the next decade. I wouldn't go to the police. Not yet. Because Claire hadn't just stolen my wedding. She'd stolen my identity, my name, my social security number, my entire legal existence. She was living as Eleanor Harrington, married to a man who thought he was mourning his dead fiancé while sleeping with her killer. And if I surfaced now, screaming and desperate, she'd twist it. She'd say I was unstable. She'd say I'd planned it. She'd use every resource James's money could buy to bury me in court while she smiled from our marital bed. No, I needed to be smarter than that. I needed to be patient. I needed to become someone she couldn't see coming. Maya got me a job at her cousin's accounting firm in Portland under a new name, Elena Marsh. Fake ID, fake history, real work. I spent my days reconciling spreadsheets and my nights studying, not law anymore, something more specific, something Claire would never expect. I studied her. Social media made it disgustingly easy. Claire, Eleanor, posted everything: the vineyard wedding, the honeymoon in Santorini, the Manhattan penthouse, the charity galas, the pregnancy announcement, the baby shower, the christening of little Thomas Harrington, named after James's father, wearing the same blanket James had worn as an infant. I saved every photo, every post, every geotag. I built a timeline of her lies while I built a new life of my own. I got certified as a forensic accountant, then a private investigator. Then I started my own firm, Marsh and Associates, specializing in corporate fraud and identity verification. I hired people who didn't ask questions. I took cases that taught me how the wealthy hid their crimes, how the system protected them, how a paper trail could become a noose. And all the while, I watched Claire play house with my husband. James looked happy in the photos. That's what killed me. He smiled at her the way he'd smiled at me in Sal's diner, like I'd surprised him by existing. He held her hand at galas. He kissed her cheek at charity events. He carried their son on his shoulders at Central Park. And I sat in my Portland apartment, 3,000 miles away, wondering if he'd ever felt the difference. Did he notice she didn't laugh at his bad jokes? Did he notice she ordered wine instead of whiskey? Did he notice, in the dark, that her hands were colder than mine, her rhythm different, her heartbeat out of sync with the woman he'd proposed to? I told myself he didn't. I told myself he was a victim too. It was the only way I could sleep. Year 3, I moved to New York. Not Manhattan, Queens, a studio apartment above a bodega where the landlord took cash and didn't run background checks. I got a job as a paralegal at a family law firm, working cases that taught me everything about marriage fraud, annulment statutes, and the legal definition of consent. I also started getting closer. I joined the same gym as Claire. Not the same classes, not the same hours, but close enough to watch her from the elliptical machine, close enough to hear her voice ordering smoothies, close enough to see the way she checked her reflection in every mirror like she was still afraid it would show someone else. She'd gained weight since the wedding. Not much. 15 pounds? Maybe 20. She wore it well, but it wasn't my body anymore. It was hers. Softening into middle age while I stayed lean and sharp, running 5 miles every morning before the sun rose, lifting weights until my hands calloused, transforming myself into someone who could walk into any room and own it. Year 5, I attended a charity auction for pediatric cancer research. Claire was on the planning committee. I sat in the back, wearing a wig the color of burnt copper, glasses that changed my face, a dress that cost more than my rent. I watched her work the room, watched her laugh at jokes that weren't funny, watched her hand rest on James's arm like she was afraid he'd float away. He looked tired. That was new. Gray at the temples. Lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. He smiled when she touched him, but it didn't reach his eyes. not the way it used to reach mine. After the auction, I followed them to the parking garage. I stood behind a concrete pillar, close enough to hear their conversation. "You're quiet tonight," Claire said. "Long week." James unlocked the car. A Mercedes, black. The same model he'd driven when we met. "The Henderson deal fell through." "You'll fix it. You always fix things." He didn't answer. He just looked at her. Really looked at her. And for a moment, I saw something in his face I couldn't name. Doubt? Regret? The ghost of a woman who'd never gotten to say goodbye? "James?" Claire's voice sharpened. "What is it?" "Nothing." He shook his head, opened her door. "Let's go home." Home. The word hit me like a physical blow. My home. The apartment we'd picked together, with the view of the park and the kitchen I'd designed and the bed where he'd whispered promises I still remembered verbatim. I waited until their taillights disappeared. Then I walked 6 blocks to the subway, sat in an empty car, and cried for the first time since Sacramento. Year 7, I made contact. Not with James, not with Claire, with their son. Thomas Harrington Jr. was 6 years old, attending a private school on the Upper East Side. I volunteered as a reading tutor. Another wig, another name, another layer of disguise. I sat with him twice a week, helping him sound out words while I memorized his face. He had James's eyes, gray, serious, watching the world like it might disappoint him. But he had Claire's chin, her nervous habit of chewing his lip when he was thinking. Her laugh, high and sharp, that made me want to scream. "Do you have kids?" he asked me one Tuesday, closing his book. "No," I said. "But I used to want them." "What happened?" I looked at him. This child who should have been mine, this life that had been stolen before it began. And I told him the truth, wrapped in a lie. Sometimes people take things that don't belong to them, and you have to wait a very long time to get them back. He nodded like he understood. 6 years old, and he already knew the world wasn't fair. "Mommy says waiting is for people who aren't brave enough to take what they want." I froze. "She says that?" "All the time." He opened his book again, innocent and devastating. "She says the best things in life are the ones you take." I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my apartment, staring at the wall of evidence I'd collected. Photos, documents, timelines, financial records showing how Claire had drained my old bank accounts, forged my signature on property transfers, built an empire of lies, one document at a time. And I made the decision that would end everything. I would wait until their 10th anniversary. The milestone, the celebration, the moment when Claire would be most visible, most confident, most vulnerable. I would crash their party wearing the dress I'd bought for our wedding, the one she'd thrown in a dumpster, the one I'd retrieved and preserved like a relic. I would walk through those doors and I would take back my name, my husband, and my life. But first, I needed to make sure the law was on my side. That's where Richard Cole came in. I found him in a Brooklyn courthouse, defending a woman who'd been married to 3 men simultaneously without any of them knowing. He was 60, grizzled, with a voice like gravel and a mind like a steel trap. When I approached him after the verdict, not guilty on all counts, the jury charmed into submission. He looked at me like I was selling something he didn't want to buy. "I don't do consultations," he said, packing his briefcase. "You do if the case is interesting enough." I slid a folder across the bench. My twin sister stole my identity, faked my death, married my fiancé using my name and social security number, and has been living as me for 10 years. I have documented proof of every fraud, every forgery, every lie. I want to know my legal options, and I want to know how to destroy her without destroying myself. He opened the folder. He read the first page, then the second. Then he looked at me, really looked at me, and I saw the moment he realized I wasn't crazy. "Sit down," he said. We met for 6 months. Richard taught me everything about identity theft prosecution, marriage fraud statutes, and the legal concept of void ab initio. A marriage that was invalid from the start, because it was based on fraud. He explained that Claire's marriage to James was legally void because she'd entered it using my identity without my consent. He explained that I could pursue criminal charges, identity theft, fraud, kidnapping, false imprisonment, that could put her away for decades. But that's not what you want, he said, watching me across his cluttered desk. No. You want the public reckoning. You want him to see. You want her to suffer in front of everyone who matters. I want my life back. Then here's what we do. He leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with the dark joy of a man who lived for impossible cases. We don't go to the police first, we go to the party. We make the accusation public, undeniable, witnessed by 100 people. Then we file the annulment and criminal charges simultaneously, while she's still reeling. We turn her celebration into her arraignment, and we make sure James Harrington has no choice but to acknowledge that his wife, his real wife, has been alive this entire time. I smiled for the first time in years. When do we start? First, we need to establish your identity beyond doubt. Fingerprints, DNA, old medical records, witnesses who knew you before. We build a case so solid she can't claim you're an imposter. Then we wait. We're good at waiting, I said. The next 3 years were the longest of my life. I worked with Richard, gathering evidence, filing quiet legal motions, creating a paper trail that led directly to Claire's door. I renewed my real driver's license. I reactivated my real social security number. I built a financial profile under my real name that proved I'd been alive and working the entire time. Impossible if I'd drowned in a river 10 years ago, as Claire claimed. I also watched James more carefully. I learned his routines. I learned his fears. I learned that he and Eleanor slept in separate rooms now, that their marriage had become a performance for the board and the charities and the society pages. I learned that he'd hired a private investigator 3 years ago to look into my death, a search that Claire had intercepted and buried with a $50,000 bribe. He knew something was wrong. He just didn't know what. Year 9, I made my final preparations. I found the wedding dress in the storage unit where I'd kept it. Preserved, pristine, the ivory silk still smelling faintly of the lavender sachet I'd tucked in the bodice. I had it altered to fit my current body, leaner and harder than the girl who'd first worn it. I practiced my entrance in front of a mirror, timing my steps, rehearsing my face. I would not cry. I would not scream. I would be calm, collected, devastating. I would be the woman Claire pretended to be. The invitation arrived in June. Heavy cardstock, embossed gold, the kind of excess that screamed insecurity. James and Eleanor Harrington request the pleasure of your company as they celebrate 10 years of marriage. The venue was the same vineyard where I'd planned to marry him, the same gazebo, the same sunset view, the same string quartet I'd picked out a decade ago. Claire had a sense of humor. I'll give her that. Or maybe she was just arrogant enough to think she'd won forever. I RSVP'd under a fake name. I hired a photographer, a young woman named Zoe who didn't ask why I wanted every moment documented. I rented a suite at a hotel 20 minutes away, close enough to arrive quickly, far enough to avoid early detection, and I prepared my words. Not a speech, not an accusation, just a question. The same question that should have been asked 10 years ago, in front of witnesses, before God and law and everyone we loved. Do you take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? Only this time, the answer would be different. The morning of the anniversary, I woke at dawn. I showered, shaved, moisturized, painted my face with the precision of a general preparing for battle. I put on the dress. It fit perfectly, like it had been waiting for me, and I stared at my reflection until I believed what I saw. Eleanor Vance. Alive. Ready. Unstoppable. My phone buzzed. Richard. Documents filed, annulment petition and criminal complaint ready to submit on your signal. The press is standing by. Another text. Maya. I'm in the parking lot, black sedan, 3rd row. If you need to run, I'm your ride. I didn't plan to run. At 6:47 p.m., I pulled into the vineyard's service entrance. The sun was beginning its descent, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, the same colors as my wedding theme, Claire's final insult. I could hear the string quartet from the garden, playing something soft and romantic. I could smell the roses, the champagne, the perfume of women who'd never had to fight for their identities. I walked around the main building, through the kitchen where caterers rushed with trays of canapes, past the restrooms where a bridesmaid was fixing her lipstick. No one stopped me. No one recognized me. I was just another guest in an expensive dress, another shadow in an evening of light. Then I reached the doors. They were open. French doors leading to a terrace overlooking the vineyard. Inside, 200 people sat at round tables draped in ivory linen, drinking from crystal glasses, laughing at jokes I couldn't hear. At the front, under a canopy of flowers, stood a cake 10 tiers high, topped with a porcelain couple that looked nothing like us. And there, at the head table, sat Claire and James. She wore red, a deliberate choice, blood-colored and bold, nothing like the innocent bride she'd pretended to be. Her hair was styled the way I used to wear mine, loose curls cascading over shoulders that had grown soft with comfort. She was laughing at something the man beside her said, her hand resting on James's arm, her face turned toward the crowd like a queen surveying her kingdom. James looked like a man at his own funeral. He smiled when she touched him, nodded when she spoke, but his eyes were elsewhere, searching the crowd, the doors, the horizon. Looking for something he couldn't name. Looking for me, maybe, without knowing he was looking. The string quartet stopped. A man in a tuxedo stepped to the microphone. The best man, I assumed, or the MC. He tapped the glass, waited for silence. Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention, we're going to do something a little special tonight. In honor of 10 beautiful years, James and Eleanor are going to renew their vows. The crowd applauded. Claire stood beaming, extending her hand to James like she was granting him a favor. He took it, slowly, and I saw the hesitation in his fingers. The same hesitation I'd seen in the parking garage 4 years ago. The doubt that never quite died. They walked to the front, to a small arch decorated with flowers I'd chosen a decade ago. A minister stepped forward, Bible in hand, smiling like this was a blessing instead of a lie. Dearly beloved, he began, we are gathered here to celebrate the enduring love of James and Eleanor, and to witness their recommitment to one another. I pushed through the doors. The silk of my dress whispered against the floor, but no one heard it over the minister's voice. I walked down the aisle, not the center, but along the side, close enough to touch the guests, close enough to see their faces turn one by one from the happy couple to the woman in white approaching from the shadows. The minister faltered. We are gathered. Claire's head turned first. Her eyes found me, and I watched the blood drain from her face like someone had pulled a plug. Her hand tightened on James's arm. Not affection, but panic. The grip of a drowning woman. James turned more slowly. His eyes met mine, and I saw the moment the world stopped. He didn't recognize me at first. How could he? I was a ghost, a memory, a woman who'd died in a river 10 years ago. But then his gaze traveled over my face. My real face, thinner now, harder, but unmistakably the same, and I saw the realization break over him like a wave. Eleanor? He whispered. Not Claire's name. Mine. The real one. I kept walking. The crowd had gone silent, a vacuum of shock that swallowed every sound. Glasses paused halfway to lips. Forks hovered over plates. 200 people watched me approach the altar, and not one of them breathed. I stopped 3 feet from Claire, close enough to smell her perfume, my old perfume, the one I'd worn when we met. Close enough to see the sweat beading on her upper lip, the twitch in her left eye, the terror she'd hidden for a decade finally breaking through. Hello, Claire, I said. My voice was steady, calm, the voice of a woman who'd rehearsed this moment for 3,000 days. You look beautiful in my dress. She made a sound. Not words, just air escaping a collapsing lung. Her fingers dug into James's arm, but he wasn't looking at her anymore. He was looking at me. Really looking, his gray eyes wide with something that might have been hope, or horror, or the terrible weight of understanding. "Eleanor?" he said again, louder this time. "But they said Claire said you drowned." I smiled and it felt like breaking glass. "No, James. I didn't drown. I was drugged. I was locked in a storage unit. I was erased. And Claire." I turned to her, and our faces were inches apart, mirror images of a broken truth. Claire took my place. My name. My life. My husband. The crowd erupted. Not applause, chaos. Chairs scraping, voices rising, someone screaming. I ignored them all. I reached into the small purse I'd carried, ivory, matching the dress, containing everything I needed, and pulled out a folded document. "This is a petition for annulment," I said, loud enough for the front rows to hear. "Filed this morning in the New York Supreme Court. It states that the marriage between James Harrington and the woman calling herself Eleanor Vance Harrington is void ab initio, invalid from the start, because it was entered into through fraud, identity theft, and lack of consent. The real Eleanor Vance, I, never agreed to this marriage, never signed the license, never said I do. Claire did, using my face and my name and a signature she'd practiced since we were children." I turned to James, and for the first time in 10 years, I spoke to him directly. "10 years ago, you stood in this same spot and promised to love me forever. You didn't know you were promising it to the wrong woman. But I made that promise too. To you, to us, to a future that was stolen before it began." I held out my hand, the one that still wore the tan line from the ring he'd given me, the ring Claire had sold at a pawn shop for $1,200. "I never stopped being your fiancé, James. I never stopped waiting. And I never, not once, stopped loving you." Claire found her voice. It was high, shrill, the voice of a cornered animal. "She's crazy. She's my sister. She's mentally ill. She's been stalking us for years." "Am I?" I pulled out my phone, swiped to a photo, held it up for everyone to see. It was the storage unit, the zip ties, the bucket in the corner, the window too high to reach. "This is where I woke up the morning of my wedding. This is what Claire did to me. And this," another swipe, another photo, "is the police report I filed in Sacramento 3 days after I escaped. Case number 4478-B, filed under my real name, Eleanor Vance, on June 14th, 2015. The same day you were sipping champagne in Santorini, Claire." James's face had gone white. He looked at the photos, then at Claire, then at me, and I saw the pieces clicking into place. Every strange moment, every doubt, every time he'd looked at his wife and felt something missing. "Claire?" His voice was barely audible. "Is this true? Don't listen to her." Claire grabbed his arm, her nails digging in, desperate. "She's a liar. She's always been jealous. She has your eyes," James said quietly. "But she doesn't have your laugh. I always knew something was wrong. I just didn't know what." He stepped away from her. One step, then two, moving toward me like a man walking through a dream. The crowd parted around us, a sea of shocked faces and open mouths, but I only saw him. Only ever him. "Eleanor," he whispered. "Is it really you?" I reached into my purse one last time, pulled out a small velvet box, the original box, preserved for a decade, containing the ring he'd given me in Sal's diner, the ring I'd found in a pawn shop in Queens and bought back for 3 times its value. "I kept my promise," I said, opening the box. "I kept everything. Now I'm asking you to keep yours." I turned to the minister, who looked like he might faint. "Do you take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? Because you already did. 10 years ago. With me." The silence stretched forever. Then James. My James. The man who'd ordered black coffee and fixed failing businesses and loved me in a way that survived even death, reached out and took the ring. "I do," he said. "I always did. I just didn't know I was saying it to the right person." He slid the ring onto my finger, over the tan line that had never faded, and the crowd, the same crowd that had come to celebrate a lie, erupted in something new. Not applause, exactly. Awe, recognition, the sound of a truth too long buried finally breaking free. Behind us, Claire made a sound like a wounded animal. I didn't turn. I didn't need to. She was already gone. Not physically. Not yet. But in every way that mattered. The woman she'd pretended to be had walked through the door, and there was no room in the world for two of us. The police arrived 20 minutes later. Richard had called them, timing it perfectly. Not too soon to ruin the moment, not too late to let her run. They read Claire her rights while she screamed accusations, while she clawed at officers, while she finally became the person she'd always been underneath the mask. Identity theft, fraud, kidnapping, false imprisonment. The charges would keep her in Rikers until trial, and Richard promised me the trial would be short. We had DNA, fingerprints, financial records, the storage unit photos, the police report, and 200 witnesses who'd seen her confess with her silence. James and I stood on the terrace as they led her away. The sun had set, leaving a sky bruised with purple and gold. He held my hand like he was afraid I'd disappear, his thumb tracing the ring he'd just placed on my finger. 10 years, he said. You waited 10 years. I would have waited forever. Why didn't you come to me sooner? I would have believed you. I know. I turned to face him, this man who'd been as much a victim as I was, who'd loved a ghost because he didn't know she was a fraud. But I needed to be sure. I needed to be strong enough to survive what came next. And I paused, choosing honesty over comfort. I needed you to see her for what she was. Not because I told you, because you saw it yourself. He nodded, slowly, understanding settling over him like a blanket. She was never you. I knew that somewhere, but I thought I'd lost you, and she was all that was left of the dream. And now? He looked at me. Really looked. The way he had in Sal's diner, like I was the only surprising thing in a world of certainty. Now I have the dream back, and I have 10 years to make up for. We didn't kiss. Not then. The moment was too big, too fragile, too soaked in pain to rush. We just stood there, hand in hand, watching the stars come out over a vineyard that had witnessed both our beginning and our reunion. The photographers found us eventually. Zoe, snapping away from the garden, capturing the moment for the press Richard had alerted. The story would break tomorrow. Woman returns from dead to expose twins' decade of fraud, and the comments would explode with theories and opinions and the endless judgment of strangers. I didn't care. I had what I'd waited for. Not revenge, though Claire would suffer. Not justice, though the courts would provide it. What I had was simpler, and harder, and more precious than either. I had my name back. My life. My love. And I had the rest of our lives to figure out what came next.